Last time, we talked about forgiveness. This time, I want to look at what happens when you don't, and why that's sometimes exactly the right thing to do. Most people, if asked what fairness looks like, will describe some version of the golden rule. The rule we're all familiar with, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's a version of reciprocity made famous by Jesus Christ. But as I said last time, it's kind of hard to understand, let alone to put into practice. Instead, we tend to default to a much simpler form of reciprocity, the so-called silver rule, which is tit for tat, where if you treat me well, I treat you well. But if you come at me sideways, don't be surprised when I come back at you the same way. I know it sounds kind of cynical, but that's most people's lived moral experience. This eye for an eye, revisiting of hurts or pleasures, helps and harms onto others. This episode of American Socrates, then, is about whether that's really a sufficient way to deal with people morally. Not whether it's wrong, but whether it sort of has a ceiling, a limit, and what it costs to live right up against that ceiling. Welcome back to American Socrates. I'm your host, Matt Rupert. Silver rule is usually framed as the negative version of the golden rule. Do not do unto others what you would not have done unto you. But the more useful version, perhaps, for this episode is a reciprocal form. Do unto others exactly as they do unto you. We're going to match behavior here. We're going to mirror the way we get treated onto the other person. We're going to reward cooperation, and we're going to punish defection in equal proportion to what we have received. This is not exactly a low standard. It does require some measure of self-control. You have to actually track what someone did and respond proportionally rather than either escalating or caving. It rules out a kind of cruelty or exploitation or even free riding. As ethical systems go, it produces functional societies simply because it's very simple to understand. Even the most foolish among us get it. If I hit you, you're going to hit me back. And it won't take too many iterations of that process before I understand if I don't want to get hit, I need to stop throwing punches. Most of human civilization runs on some version of this. You can see it in contracts, in laws, in market exchanges, in various versions of diplomacy. The entire apparatus of modern life is essentially some kind of institutionalized version of this same kind of reciprocity. The silver rule, then, is the ethic of equilibrium. It aims to stabilize all human interactions. It seeks to distribute outcomes in a fair and balanced way, and to prevent various forms of exploitation. It does not aim at any kind of transformation. That distinction is the whole argument of this episode. In the 1980s, a political scientist named Robert Axelrod ran a series of computer tournaments. He invited game theorists to submit strategies for a repeated version of a classical problem. Two players who can either cooperate or defect, where defecting pays better in the short, but mutual cooperation pays better over the long term. The question was which strategy would win across hundreds of repeated interactions with many different opponents. The winner, repeatedly, was the simplest strategy submitted: tit for tat. Cooperate on the first move. After that, you just do whatever the other player did in the last round. Reward cooperation with more cooperation, and you punish defection with defection. Then, you would forgive immediately and return to cooperation the moment the opponent does. What tit for tat demonstrates then is that the silver rule isn't just intuitively satisfying, it is mathematically strong. In stable, repeated interactions between rational actors, reciprocity of this kind is an optimal strategy. It's not just being fair to other people, it's actually a really effective way of getting them to cooperate with you. But the model has certain conditions, and those conditions are really going to matter here. Tit for tat requires that interactions be repeated on multiple iterations. So if the interaction is one and done, you're going to interact one time and then you're never going to see this person again, tit for tat doesn't really work very well. You have to expect the encounter to this person over and over again in the future for the consequences to be able to shape any kind of present behavior. They have to expect to do business with you over and over again, for example. If you're going to do business one time and then never do business again, then this is not going to be an effective strategy. So it requires that moves are clearly readable as well. You need to be able to see exactly what is happening here. You have to have accurate perception as to what the other person just did. And it requires also a relatively low noise environment so that if the signals get garbled, tit for tat can ultimately lock two cooperative players into some kind of mutual retaliatory spiral that neither of them really intended. They just can't see what's going on well enough in order to make accurate judgments about what the other side is actually doing. In real life, all the three of these conditions tend to break down pretty quickly. Many interactions that we get into are, in fact, one shot. Every time you meet a stranger who you are very unlikely to meet again, you do business with a business that you're likely never to stop in again. You deal with institutions or people as you travel across the country. Those sorts of interactions are not going to be susceptible for this. Perception is routinely distorted by things like stress, history, the assumptions that we make about people, our ideologies that we cling to, our beliefs. And what feels like a slight on the one hand, feels like a slight to you, might in fact have been pretty neutral. They might not have been trying to insult you. You simply took it wrong. And social environments are often extremely noisy. We live in an environment of rumors, of misunderstandings, of third-party interferences. We have bad days, and all of that introduces errors that tit for tat really can't distinguish very well from a genuine and earnest defection. So in these broken or high noise systems, tit for tat actually doesn't lead to a very stable system. It tends to escalate problems. Each side ends up believing that it's retaliating proportionately to what the other side is doing. Neither side believes that it threw the first punch. The cycle becomes self-sustaining over time, and the original trigger ultimately fades into the background, becoming meaningless and irrelevant. It's the Hatfields and the McCoys, right? The two feuding families begin killing each other over whatever the latest incident was, not what the original dispute was over. I don't think it's too much of a stretch of the imagination to see how this plays out in American politics today. You have two different rival political parties, each one seeing the other increasingly as the enemy. And under such a system, the idea of the silver rule comes into play. Each side is treating the other one as if it was just attacking them. Everything that the other side does is some form of attack, some form of offensive, and you must defend yourself by attacking back. Only then will they get the message. Only then will they learn that they're not the ones in charge. And so it just continually escalates. Each side attacking the other one, each side growing more hostile, more violent. So in some ways, the silver rule dominates modern life. It's an appeal to a version of justice that we all feel is necessary for fairness. The silver rule then isn't just a philosophical proposition, it's a default operating system of contemporary culture. And it's worth looking at like where this appears in our society and how often we rely on it, even though we're not necessarily aware of that's what we're doing. The first place we might look for it is in contracts and institutions. The legal and economic infrastructure of our society is pretty much codified by reciprocity. If you perform your obligations, you ought to receive your compensation. You do the work, you should get paid. If you breach those things, you should face proportional consequences. If you break the laws, you should receive some form of punishment. The tit for tat mentality here is obvious, even though it's somewhat in the background. And for the most part, I think that this works for us, like as a society. We agree with this, at least in principle. It's usually the exceptions that we have a problem with. When we misjudge someone's actions or when the crime doesn't fit the punishment or something like that. But very few people are willing to argue that we would abolish things like contracts because they apply more to the silver rule than to anything else. We generally see contracts as a good thing. You agreed to do this, I agreed to pay you that. If you did your part of the obligations, then I ought to owe you the money, so on and so forth. That's how the court systems work. When we talk about somebody damaging someone else's property, we talk about them being forced to restore it. That is a consequence of their behavior, ought to be they are the ones now responsible for fixing it. That kind of back and forth, that kind of tit for tat. Another place that we see this, though, especially today, is in social media. We have the outrage cycle, right? Which is tit for tat running at machine-like speed in this sort of maximal noise environment where information comes at us through this system of immediate reward and immediate punishment. Somebody says something offensive, somebody retaliates. Somebody counter-retaliates to that retaliation, and it escalates. The original statement quickly becomes besides the point. What sustains the cycle is this mirroring logic. Everyone believes they're responding proportionally. The noise level makes accurate perception nearly impossible. And the result is you get a system that looks a lot like it's performing justice, but functions like a feud. That carries over into political retaliation. Legislative bodies increasingly operate on explicit tit-for-tat mentalities. You changed the rules when you were in power, so we're going to now change them further. You held our guys from getting appointed, and so when it's your turn in office, we're going to stop you. This creates a race for power, where the power has to be either total and dominant or non-existent. This increases the stakes, of course, on every single political election. It's all or nothing now. It's either kill or be killed. It's no longer we're not going to fuck with you guys if you don't fuck with us. It's we're going to constantly fuck with you. And so in order to prevent ourselves from being screwed over, we have got to stop you entirely, completely dominate you, completely control you. Each escalation then is framed as proportional in response to the last one, but the baseline of what counts as normal just keeps shifting. Nobody throws the first punch, but everyone is retaliating. And that, again, is tit for tat, working exactly as it's designed to do, but producing a kind of institutional decay that wears down things like democracies. Democracies depend, at least on a certain extent, on trusting your opponents. The boxer in the ring understands the rules. He's going to throw punches. We understand that. He's going to hit me. I'm going to hit him. But he's not coming in there with a gun. There's certain things that he can't do, and I have to trust that he's not going to do those things in order for us to have this fight. Otherwise, it's just all-out warfare. It's civil war. Another place that we see tit for tat, and perhaps the most personal and perhaps the most damaging even, is in close relationships and marriages. Research on relationships in distress consistently finds this same kind of pattern. There's a ratio of negative to positive interactions that tips past a certain threshold. Everybody has like disagreements and makes mistakes in a relationship. That's okay. But once it gets past this threshold, there's a shift in the partnership from trying to repair the damages and reconcile the relationship to retaliation. This is now just a matter of, I'm going to get them back for what they did to me. And so small slights start to become mirrored. The mirroring hardens into a kind of general pattern for the relationship. The pattern then becomes the identity of the relationship. And this is just how we are with each other. The silver rule, applied in these kinds of intimate relationships, then produces a kind of terrible, terrible stalemate, where the two are not working together or not even capable of getting on the same page. The two people in this relationship are simply locked horns and are struggling against each other in a futile attempt that ultimately destroys both of them. The two people then just wait for the other to make a move so that they can win, each feeling justified in their victory. But of course, that doesn't happen. They just go on and on and on. The common thread then between all of these is that the silver rule does stabilize systems that are already functional, but it accelerates the deterioration of systems that are out of balance. Like I mentioned in the last episode, when I said that the problem with the golden rule was the scorekeeping that a person has to do, the constant ledger monitoring of, well, how many times have I had this problem or that problem or whatever. That becomes the psychological cost of the silver rule here as well. Living by the silver rule does require this sort of ongoing monitoring. You have to track what people are doing. You have to sort of keep tabs on them in order to be able to find out if they're about to betray you and should you betray them back. If they are doing good things for you, then you need to be responding with equal kindness. And so there's this constant checking in that you have to do. So you have to track what people do, you have to assess whether it warrants any kind of response, and you have to calibrate proportionally whatever your reply is going to be. And then, of course, stay alert for the next move. In low stakes, really stable relationships, this is mostly something we do unconsciously. In really strained or very adversarial kinds of relationships, this can become a significant cognitive and emotional burden. And this is a huge load to put on yourself, as you have to watch and monitor and remain vigilant. Specifically, one way of looking at this is you have to become hypervigilant. When you're operating on reciprocity in a contested environment, ambiguous signals often get read as threats. A slow email reply. Somebody's tone is a little off. Somebody made an omission. The monitoring system starts to generate these sort of false positives for you because you simply suspect that there is something else going on. And so you start responding to things that may not actually be there. You become angry and upset over miscommunications, misunderstandings. You start to retaliate for misperceptions of aggression. And that strains the relationship even further because your actual responses to these misperceptions are, in fact, real attacks. You're doing real attacking over a mistake, thinking that you're responding. Also, a cost that comes along with this is this sort of identity rigidity. People who have been operating in retaliatory mode for a long time often find that the stance has simply become their self-description. This is who they are. You know, they have resting bitch face, to put a term on it. Like they've been angry and bitter for so long that that's just how they look. Letting something go here then feels like a kind of loss. Like I said before, you know, forgiveness of this kind feels like they're being put out. And so it's not a good tactic for them. It's more like a personal problem. The vigilance stops being a strategy and just becomes a part of their character then. And this is particularly visible in long-term family conflicts and political identity problems, where grievances load bearing for the sense of the self. There's also a sort of foreclosure of initiative here. Strict reciprocity means you rarely move first in a positive direction, because moving first is a vulnerability. If you're the first guy to go, you signal to them your move before they even make a move. So they already start with a slight advantage. So a lot of people will wait to see what the other person does. And this is rational in certain adversarial contexts where maybe you're just waiting to see where your enemy goes before you make your move. But it tends to be pretty corrosive in relationships that could be repaired or aren't particularly hostile. Both people are just waiting. Both people are just calling it the other person's turn to move, and nothing ever progresses. Nothing ever gets done. Both parties end up sitting the fence, and while the repair work could have been done ages ago, the conflict continues, even if it doesn't escalate, simply because nobody's willing to start doing the repair work. So the silver rule asks us to be fair, sure, but it does not ask you to be free from any of this. The vigilance is a necessary built-in part of fairness under this conception. So what is the ceiling of all this? Where does reciprocity sort of tap out? Well, the silver rule can prevent exploitation, but it cannot generate trust where none exists. It can stabilize a conflict, but it cannot resolve one. It can distribute outcomes fairly, but it cannot change what people want from each other. And that's the ceiling. And it's worth our time to really dig into this, because what lies beyond that ceiling, what the silver rule can't touch, is some really important stuff that I think that we as an individual and as a people really need. The first might be a sense of trust between strangers. Every functional community requires a baseline of generosity that is not, strictly speaking, been earned. A willingness to extend a sense of good faith before it's ever been proven. I don't know you, but I'm going to give you an opportunity before I critique you, before I criticize you, before I assume that you're lying or manipulating me. I have to have a reason to assume those things. So my default position must be you're one of a good person, and so therefore I should take what you have to say seriously, even if I ultimately come out to disagree with it. Neighborhoods, mutual aid networks, communities of every kind, all of them rely on this kind of unearned trust. Pure reciprocity kind of free rides on this generosity without actually being the thing that produces it. It's not reproducing that kind of trust. It's an initial assumption that builds the rest of community on it. And if we're following the strict tenets of reciprocity, then we're not going to extend that. We're going to wait and see what happens, and we're never going to get started building that community. You can see this in the way certain people, especially online, just immediately assume anyone who doesn't hold the beliefs that they already hold is probably out to manipulate them, out to lie, out to trick them. There's so much distrust and misinformation, a lack of faith, a lack of belief. You distrust science because science has let you down at some point. Okay, fine. That's one thing. But that wouldn't be everyone who happens to be a scientist. Not everyone let you down. And so to extend that to all science everywhere and anyone who purports to be a scientist is to really violate the tenets of what we're saying here. Another part of this ceiling is recovery from broken systems. The silver rule cannot help us fix what is already broken. When a relationship or an institution or a community or a society has deteriorated past a certain point, someone has to make a first move without any guarantee of return. Strict reciprocity provides no mechanism for this because the whole idea is that I'm going to revisit onto them what they did unto me. So I don't have any way to break that cycle. I don't have any way to break that pattern without giving up on the logic of the silver rule, which can't do that, right? It can't generate that first cooperative move in a system where defection has become the stable system. So something outside of the reciprocity framework has to be introduced. It has to be injected into our system. Two warring sides suddenly find they have a common enemy. That outside force then pushes the two together, and it breaks them out of their mutual distrust of each other, because now they're working together. They're capable of working together. They've proven that they're capable of working together, and that is what is needed in order to restabilize in a new kind of silver rule type logic. There's a texture of life then, and this is a much subtler point that I'm trying to get to here. A life organized around fairness, getting what you give, giving what you get, that's not obviously a bad life, but it is a life with a particular kind of shape and particular dimensions. It tends to be really transactional. Everyone is just someone that you're using, and they're using you. We see like an Ayn Randian egoist sense of reality, a sense of community, a sense of fairness, where everything is instrumental and everything is transactional. It's defensive at its margins, this kind of life. Like everywhere you get into slightly unknown areas, you're likely to have your hackles up. And it's dependent on others behaving well for you in order for you to behave well. You can't just be a good person. You have to only be a good person if they're going to be a good person. So the question is whether the full extent of our moral ambitions or our ideal life, our ideal world, could actually be fulfilled using this. Whether it's a floor, maybe, rather than a ceiling. And are we sinking as low as we could? Consider the golden rule again. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's independent from what they've actually done. It's not more naive necessarily than the silver rule. It is more demanding in a way. It asks you to act from your own values rather than in a reaction to simply what other people are doing. You're not being asked to always be reacting. In this case, you're asked to reflect, consider, and try something different. That could be that third thing that knocks the system in a new direction. The difficulty of doing this, of course, isn't evidence that it's simply unrealistic. It's more like the evidence that we've gotten comfortable with at a lower standard and then called that wisdom. So I guess in the end, what I'm trying to say here is that fairness is not a little thing. Most of the world's suffering would be eliminated if people simply treated each other fairly. The silver rule is not necessarily our enemy, but it is a stabilizing agent and not necessarily an engine of moral justice. It maintains what exists pretty well if we can build a system that is generally working. But it's not going to build anything itself. The question I think that you guys should be asking yourselves is, in your closest relationships, the ones that you really feel matter to you, are you operating on this notion of reciprocity? Waiting to see what the other person does before you decide what you're going to give? And if so, is that really fairness? Or is that just the ceiling that you've agreed to without quite deciding to agree to it?
Thanks for tuning in to American Socrates. If today's episode of Philosophy got you thinking in new ways, make sure to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. New, full episodes drop every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, leave a review. It helps others find us, and it means a lot. And if you know someone who could use a little more practical wisdom in their life, share this episode with them. Until next time, keep questioning everything.